the ambient noise of frantic hungover people trying to find their rooms, that'd be great.
One more.
Oh, great. 19. 19. We almost made 20. Okay. All right. We'll open the door as soon as she gets here. We'll all glare at her disapprovingly. No, we won't. Okay. Excellent. Okay. Well, hello, everybody. I don't know how many people of you know who I am. My name is Lesley Carhart, and you're in the room. You're not in Jack Daniels concocting drinks talk, so if you meant to be in there, the room is upstairs. But if you wanted to be in this room, we're going to be discussing building an incident response program, which is much less exciting than either ham radios or making mixed drinks. So, yeah, I know you're all really disappointed that you're not in one of the cool talks right now, but you probably have a reason for being in a talk about building an incident response team today. So, pretty much everybody here probably works in IT or in some kind of security-related role. And all of you probably work in an organization that could hypothetically be hacked or compromised. Therefore, you all have a need for incident response. And you probably have realized that since you're sitting in this room. But if not, I'm going to try to sell you on why you should have an incident response program in your organization, company, employer, educational institution by the end of our few hours we're going to spend together today. This is scheduled to be a 4-hour talk. A lot of that's going to depend on how long it takes you guys to complete the exercise I have prepared for you guys. We're going to be breaking into, hello. It's okay. And now we have 20 people, so it's nice and even, and I don't have to be OCD about it. All right, so we're going to be breaking into small groups for this class, and I'm going to explain a little bit more in a couple slides about what the exercises are going to look like. But they are going to be gamified, and I'll explain what gamified means, but this fact that I have a bunch of D20s sitting here, which should be concerning or very, very happy for most of you, should be an indicator of how this is going to work. And now we have 21 people, and it's not an even number anymore, and I don't know if I can deal with that. So, the questions you should be asking about your organization, because we've established that most of you are in IT. Does anybody in here not work in IT other than the young lady? She's going to work in IT anyway. And do any of you not work for an organization that could potentially be hacked or infected? I really hope I don't see anybody but the lovely young lady raising their hand right now. So we all have a need for responding to those types of incidents in an organized way, otherwise we run around like chickens with our heads cut off. So who the heck is this woman in a Mean Girls shirt standing up here talking about incident response? My name is, again, Lesley Carhart. I'm otherwise known as Hacks for Pancakes on Twitter. I post very responsible, mature things about information security, as I'm sure you're familiar. I am, outside of being a dork on Twitter, I'm a forensics nerd. I do digital forensics and incident response. I work for a little company called Motorola Solutions. I write all the security content on their website because I decided we needed more security content on our website, and I told them so. And despite that, this talk and all the content and the opinions expressed therein are entirely mine and don't reflect that of my employers. And I also want to mention, for the legalese sake, that I don't endorse any of the products that I'm mentioning in this talk. I'm going to bring up some product names, some service, some vendor names, just because they're relevant to incident response and what we do. I tried to keep that to a minimum, but it may come up in discussion. I do not endorse these products. We're just going to talk about them for a hypothetical situation. And I do a lot of other stuff, so I don't like going into details. I do stuff. I fight people. I shoot things. So we're going to talk about a few different things during our 3 to 4 hours together. We're going to talk about what an incident response program is, an incident response team, what it looks like, why your organization and yours and yours and yours and yours and everybody except for the lovely young lady in the front of the room needs one. And then we're going to start talking about what you probably came here to see today, which is the requirements for building an incident response program. What you need to build a program, to start out from the very beginning of not having any incident response program whatsoever, and bringing resources and people together and constructing one. So we're going to talk about step-by-step hiring and developing a team of humans, which is really, in the end, the most critical part of any security venture. We're going to talk about the tools that you need to buy or acquire or build, and the procedures. Obviously, written procedures are a large part of incident response, which is why this talk may get rather dull, and I tried to make it a little more fun with pink D20s. Does anybody not know what a D20 is? Just, oh dear. Oh, you guys. Oh, you guys. You're going to find out. And then, as I just mentioned with the D20s, we're going to do some scenarios. There's going to be 3 labs in this class, and we're going to break into small groups. I would recommend of 4 people. We might have a couple groups that are 3 people, depending on whether we end up with an odd or an even number of people in here. And you're going to have to cooperate with random people, random strangers at a con. So think about who you want to break into a group with. I recommend you break into a group with people you don't know. It'll make this a lot more interesting, but I don't care. I'm not going to police it. I'm not Rob Lee. So we're going to do those gamified groups labs, and then we're going to discuss them. We're going to discuss each group's solution and say what we think about it, because everybody's going to be presented with a different scenario. So what's incident response? I hate putting lots of words on slides. There's more on these slides because I know that some people are going to want to take them home with them and use them to build an incident response team later. So the basics of an incident response team, I'm not going to read this at you, are that you're responding to a bad thing that happened, a security incident of some sort. That can look like a lot of different things. In terms of physical security, it could be somebody breaking into a building. In terms of digital security, it could be a malware outbreak. It could be any kind of breach, a data breach, any kind of breach of network. But in the end, what we want to do with incident response is reduce the time and the money lost due to that incident, due to somebody stealing something or somebody tampering with something. But again, we're going to keep coming back to these concepts of time and money because those are the business critical things. Security's great, but in the end, we don't always win out in a business context. Everybody here who works for a large company probably knows that by this point. We don't always win. What wins are quantifiable time and money. And when we're talking about incident response, we're going to keep coming back to the concepts of trying to decrease the amount of time and money we're losing due to security incidents. And an important thing to remember throughout this entire course is that lots of other people do incident response too. This is like the spot the Fed thing here, but do I have any veterans in here? No? Any police, fire, anything like that? See, those are the people who do incident response from a different context than we do in security, and they bring a lot to the incident response space, and we don't think about this a lot. There's a couple speakers in incident response who actually talk about this, but incident response in other industries is a lot more developed than security incident response, unfortunately for us, information security response. Police have very established systems for how they deal with an incident, in drilling to prepare for it, in performing exercises to keep their skills up to date and figure out how people respond to each incident. They have well-documented procedures, and you see that again in emergency management, the people who go to disaster areas, the people who deal with hazmat or aircraft crashes. And an important thing we need to remember throughout discussing building this incident response program is that we're not in a vacuum. We have those resources already that we can pull from and that we should think about while we're building our programs. So you can go and read up on how people respond to aircraft crashes and pull things that we'll talk about today. The way we learn procedures, the way we document tasks, directly, almost directly from the procedures that those responders in law enforcement and emergency management use. So I'm going to bring that up throughout this talk. Where we can draw existing incident response procedures, triage skills, skills that every incident responder needs to know. And I do another talk on the 10 Commandments of Incident Response. You can go find it on Iron Geek's website, where I talk about triage independently as a skill for incident responders. And we're going to talk a lot about today how you build triage skills. So I talked a little bit about there being a lot of different types of security incidents that we might have to deal with in our day-to-day work doing incident response. And let's keep those in mind, that there's two major categories, which are the physical or kinetic incidents and the digital computer-based incidents, the things that happen in the digital world. And they are both security incidents. But they involve different teams, they involve different responses, and not every incident response program is going to deal with both of those types of security incidents. So when we're establishing the scope of our incident response process, which we're going to do in a little bit, we're going to want to think about which types of security incidents our program is going to deal with. And that's going to contextually be based a lot on what our organization does and what other teams and what other resources we have available to our incident response team. So why do we need this incident response team? I mean, I asked everybody already if there's anybody in here whose organization or employer couldn't be hacked, and the only person who said they could not have a security incident was the lovely young lady in the front of the room, who I'm sure will be faced with such a scenario in the future someday. So we know that security data breaches, security incidents are expensive. They've become more and more expensive over the last few years as they've become more and more prevalent. We're not talking about having data breach insurance in organizations, which is something that would have been unfathomable 10 years ago. But now, the last IBM study that I read had a cost of an average of $3.5 million for a data breach for large organizations, for Fortune 1000 companies. And so we're dealing with, again, time and money. And those are things that organizations really, really care about. So from a quantifying and presenting to management context, we have great reasons, great financial and proprietary information reasons to have an incident response program. And where we're going to save the time outside of the money is that we're going to have documented plans. We're going to have plans ready to go, drilled, ready to triage, entirely established within our organization with our risk management staff, that we can present to senior leadership and say, this is our plan. If we become target, if we become OPM, this is what we're going to do. These are our set procedures. They're in a binder. You've seen them. You know what we're going to do, and we know what we're going to do. And that also gives us the ability to predetermine our staffing, which tools we need to acquire, any other resources we need available to our incident response team. And it also ensures that we hire specialists who can do the roles necessary for an incident response team. And we're going to talk about what some of those roles are and the benefits of having them and what we lose if we don't have those personnel and those skill sets in our incident response team. So I'm sure the thing that something that you all came in here wanting to know is what an incident response program or team looks like. And I'm going to give a very unpleasant answer that I'm going to give a few times during this talk, which is it depends. There's a lot of variables that go into what your incident response program and team looks like. It's going to depend on the services that they need to offer. It's going to depend on the customers they're servicing. And it's going to depend on the size of the organization or organizations that they're servicing. It's going to depend on those functions, those physical or logical functions that we talked about a little while ago. And of course, being business, it's going to depend on money and time. And there's two major types of incident response teams that we're going to talk about today, which are the fixed teams. You establish an incident response program with a dedicated team, and the so-called SWAT teams. Yes, that's an industry term. It's not mine. I wouldn't use such a silly term. And the SWAT teams are the teams that some of you in smaller organizations may be familiar with, which are, we have an incident. We know that we grab this person, this person, this person, this person, who normally have other jobs. We put them in a room, and we respond to the incident. And they keep working on the incident until they're done. And then they go back to their regular day jobs. And there's benefits and negatives to both of those types of teams, and we're going to talk about both of them. In our labs today, we're going to be talking about a fictitious company called Renraku, and Renraku is building a fixed team, but in all of our exercises, we can think about how we would establish the same functionality with the SWAT team as well, because some of you might be in a situation where you can't afford to have dedicated IR staff. You have to do the SWAT team model. You have to draw in all those skill sets from people who are already employed for your company and already doing other jobs that might be just as high severity. And you also want to know what kind of jobs you need, what kind of people and skills you need in your incident response team. And there's a long list of people who are involved in incident response, but some that you might be familiar with are your incident responders and handlers, which are different things, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And you have, of course, your malware reversers, your people who deal with the malicious code. You have your forensic analysis, the forensic analysts are the people who actually dig into machines and phones and digital devices and say, this is what happened, this is how it happened, this is what went wrong. You have your engineers, the people who set up your tools and your IDS rules and your other security appliances. And then you have people who might not report directly to the incident response team, but are just as critical to its involvement, like your legal team and your loss prevention team, perhaps your SOC, perhaps some threat intelligence staffing. So there's a lot of different job roles that can be involved in handling an incident depending on your industry and your staffing. So I mentioned that incident response and incident handling aren't the same thing. And this is an important thing to remember while we're building our teams. Because incident response are the people who figure out from beginning to end what went wrong in an incident and how to resolve it. They're coordinating your forensic analysts and your malware analysts and saying, you got attacked by APT 1 billion on Thursday, and they stole a candlestick from the library with, Colonel Mustard? Was it Colonel Mustard? I can't remember. So that's what your incident responders doing. They're doing the detectives. They're figuring out what happened and how it happened and what went wrong. But you've also got the incident handlers who get the short end of the stick, but they're actually probably the more critical role because they are the people who are dealing with management. Your incident responder is doing his Sherlock Holmes and looking really cool, and your incident handler is in the office with the director who's going, oh my God, we're going to be target. Tell me how we're not going to be target. Are we going to lose $5 million? Did you talk to the marketing team yet? Did you talk to the corporate communications team? And that incident handler is in there dealing with the freakouts. They're the ones who are going to write up something for the board. They're the ones who are going to interface with your IT team who doesn't know what's going on and don't want to reset the passwords and don't want to re-image the machines. Your incident handler is going to be dealing with all those humans, which makes it a really critical role for incident response. So I want you to keep in mind as we're talking about these job roles on your team that these are two different things, and I highly advise, if it's possible in your environment, to assign both those roles. That doesn't mean that you have to have a dedicated incident responder and a dedicated incident handler. It means that you should, in every incident, say, you're the incident handler, you're the incident responder, and from beginning to end, while you're working on the incident, those two people have those roles, and they work in conjunction with each other. That way you don't have your incident responder sitting there trying to go through the timeline of the incident and do their cool stuff, while a manager is standing over their head going, was this not done 2 hours ago? I expected an email report. Why are you not on this conference bridge? Which will happen during the course of handling an incident. So what are our variables? Why do I say it depends? I'm really terrible about saying it depends. So why do I say it depends? Well, we have to think about the organization that we're dealing with. So the first variable in how we construct our incident response program is going to be the industry we're in. And by that I mean, do you work in the financial sector? Do you work in defense contracting? Do you work in education or healthcare or any other major industry group? What are you in, and what are people trying to do to you? And that means, first of all, inside your network, identifying what your high-value targets are. And Ian Amit gave a talk yesterday, and I hope you all saw it, about threat intelligence. And he brought up this point, and I swear you can check the timestamp on this slide. I haven't updated it since then because we're going to say the exact same thing. Two things you need to know to understand how you're being attacked is, first of all, your high-value targets inside your environment. And that's not necessarily your decision. You're not necessarily deciding, well, I think that my financial system's pretty important, and I think my HR system's pretty important, and I think they might want to steal some of our engineering stuff. You don't necessarily make that decision. That decision is made with your risk management staff and with your senior leadership. So while you're constructing your incident response program, you want to bring in those or other organizational people who can tell you what your high-value targets are. What will cause you the most damage? What would people want to steal in your environment? And you're going to collaborate with them, and you're going to make a list, and you're going to say, this is a thing that we think people are going to target the most. This is something that could cause us a ton of financial impact if it was damaged or stolen or deleted. And those are going to be your high-value targets, and that's what you identify inside your network. What you identify outside of your network is more of the threat intelligence, which is who wants to steal it? Who doesn't like us? Would it be hacktivists? Is Anonymous going to try to hack us? Have we been doing bad things that they might want to deface our website for? Or are we dealing with I'm not going to say it, I don't have a drink. Potential nation-state actors. I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to say it. So, yes, what are our adversaries? What do they look like? Are we mostly concerned with cybercrime? Are we concerned with people's botnets stealing financial data from our finance department? So we establish those two things when we're at the very first stages of building our incident response program, because that's going to reflect everything that comes after it. We also want to establish what services our team is going to offer. So are we going to do forensics, or are we going to outsource that to a third party? Are we going to perform malware analysis in-house? That's when we're going to decide whether we have a fixed or a SWAT team as our incident response team. And we're going to decide where it's going to fit into our corporate hierarchy. And I know that's really boring, but we have to sit there and we have to talk to our senior leadership and say, so are we going to report directly to the CISO? Do we not have one? Is the incident response team going to report to loss prevention? Is it going to report to the CIO? And that's relevant because when we're building the rest of our team out, not only do we have to get funding from those various departments, we have to know what our reporting chain is during an incident. So that's going to be relevant to our interests, where our team is going to fit into the structure. And then the time and money thing that I brought up, and I'm going to keep bringing up incessantly. We're going to have two types of costs. We're going to have implementation costs and recurring costs. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a little while. But we're going to have the costs of initially setting up our incident response program, which is going to involve human capital. It's going to involve purchasing software, purchasing hardware, perhaps even things like office space. And then we're going to have a recurring costs, which are going to be paying people salaries, keeping the lights on, paying software renewal costs, and licensing costs. So all of those things are going to go into our budget considerations and what we can and can't do. And for that, again, we're not existing in a vacuum. We're going to bring in our finance folks for this. We're going to bring in our senior leadership, and we're going to bring in our loss prevention team. and talk about what we can afford to do given our situation and given what the possible risk is of a security incident in our environment. We're going to think about the size of the organization we're in and how big our team should be in relation to that organization. Now, that can also depend on budget. There's large companies that can't afford to establish and will make the risk management decision to not maintain a fixed or a large incident response team. But we need to make a decision of how many humans we need to staff this team in the amount. Are they going to run 24/7? If so, we've got to have people who can work on call or work around the clock. And we have to think about how many people that's going to take. If we need to have 2 people on shift, and they need to be on shift 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we have to sit there and do the math and say, what if one of them gets sick? What are we going to do then? We can't have somebody working around the clock. They have to go home and sleep. So we have to actually staff 3 people instead of 2 people so that there's somebody on swing if somebody gets sick, or otherwise if they quit their job, we still have the staffing to cover our expected SLAs. And next, we're going to have to think about the tools and resources that we already have available and the tools and resources that we want to have available. And we may be working in an organization that already has a security team of some sort. We might already have a SOC, or we might already have some kind of security staffing. So we're going to need to take an inventory of the things we have already. Do we have a SIM? Do we have a log aggregation tool? Do we have some forensics tools? Sometimes we see those in our e-discovery teams in legal. So what do we have already, and what do we need to buy to be where we want to be as we establish this plan? So we're going to make our assessment of what we have already, and then we're going to start bringing in the budget folks to talk about, can we afford a full forensic implementation over our network? Can we buy a next generation firewall, or can we buy a intrusion prevention system? Do we have one already that we can leverage and update? And the final consideration that we need to evaluate when we're talking about building our procedure before we even begin is, what does our organization look like? Is it heterogeneous or homogeneous? So do we have a bunch of departments that run their own computers or their own domain controllers, and each department functions differently? Is there one department that uses Macs? Is there another department over here that's entirely Linux-based? How many different things are we dealing with? Because that's going to be a critical sticking point in incident response, because you're going to have to train your incident responders and your malware analysts and your forensic analysts to deal with all of those different environments. Beyond the skill sets they'll need to bring in to deal with all these different technologies in a very heterogeneous environment is they're also going to have to document procedures for every one of these networks. If you have a bunch of subsidiaries and each of them has a different reporting chain, every one of those reporting chains in event of an emergency is going to have to be documented in your incident response procedure. If it's a more homogeneous environment and everybody reports through the same chains and everybody uses the same type of desktop images and the same type of server images, that's a lot less documentation you have to use. You only have one thing that you have to go through to analyze a host, and you only have one set of documentation for the analysis of those hosts. So you're going to have to establish right away, what is our environment, what does our network look like, what does our operating system environment look like, and is there different management operation standards in use in different parts of our network. So we've talked a little about what we need to know before we start building our incident response team. So we kind of have an idea now of the types of information we want to know about our fake company before we start digging into it. For our scenarios, I'm going to hand out sheets of paper with exercises on them. And I'd like you all to break into groups of 4 for these exercises. If we have an odd group, we can be a group of 3. You're going to get a copy of the exercise, and it's going to talk a little bit about a fictitious company. Now the trick here, the gimmick and the gamification of this exercise is every scenario you get is going to be randomly generated. How totally messed up or wonderful Renraku Company is going to depend on what you roll on these dice, these handy-dandy Dungeons & Dragons dice. So, if I say your company has blank widgets, and I say roll a d6, I'm going to pick up this 6-sided dice, I'm going to roll it, and I'm going to say, my company has one widget. I shouldn't roll dice today. My company has one widget. And you're going to write that number in the blank, and for the rest of the exercises for this class, your company, your version of Renraku Company has one widget. And you're going to fill in all those blanks. Ooh, I'm throwing things. Oh, boy. You're going to fill in all those blanks on the piece of paper. And you're going to read through your scenario. And I'm going to give you some questions about your scenario and maybe some problems that Renraku is facing. And based on your version of Renraku Corporation, your group is going to come up with a solution to those problems. None of these questions need a technical solution. None of you need to be experts at malware analysis or forensics or security engineering. I imagine a lot of people in this room are, and you're more than welcome to offer those technical solutions. But there isn't a single exercise in here that can't be answered with a human solution, a common sense solution. And all of the questions have multiple solutions because we're dealing with a company and it's complicated. I will note that some of the Renrakus out there are going to be in a much better place than others. And you will be throughout this exercise, but that's just the random rolls of the dice. And some of them are going to have problems that others don't have. And some of them are going to have advantages that others don't have. So what we're going to do is, in your small group, you're going to discuss those scenarios. And you can ask me any questions about Renraku or your version of Renraku that you'd like to. I'm going to be acting as their CISO. And once you come up with your answers, we're going to take about 15 minutes going through the exercises. Each team is going to have a representative stand up and describe your version of Renraku and what your answers to the questions were, so that if anybody has ideas or questions about your solution, we can discuss them as a group. There's going to be 3 of these exercises. So, you all came here to find out what you need to build an incident response program. So we talked about the things you need to know, the ideas you need to have before you even start building the program. But the next thing that we need to have is support from our senior leadership team, because none of this is going to work effectively without some support from your management team. And I have these comments here. The laser doesn't work on here, but they're in orange boxes. That's okay. I'm all right. Yeah, that's okay. I had these orange boxes on these slides, and I wrote something out in a blog post a little while, which is Lesley's rule of SOC. And I've been writing these rules of SOC for a long time, and they're like, update your IDSs. Don't buy shiny boxes. They're just things that annoy me about how people run their security teams. So I've included some of them in here. And on this slide, I complained about this a little while ago, is if your executives aren't at the head of your InfoSec initiatives, they're probably clicking on phishing emails. So you need to have executive support to get this program off the ground. And why is that? Even if you somehow get funding to construct an incident response team, and you have no support from senior leadership, you are going to be dismantled over the course of your first couple years working in incident response. Because people in incident response do things that other departments in the company do not like. You're going to do a lot of things in the course of responding to malware and targeted threats. You're going to take computers down to re-image them. You're going to take people's computers away to analyze them. You're going to shut off access to websites or C2 channels, pieces of malware. You're going to make people's computers restart while you're pushing emergency patching. And nobody likes these things. We like them. We think they're pretty cool, but I'm pretty sure everybody here has skipped a Windows update because it annoyed them at some point. And we're going to be dealing with whole organizations full of people who are really annoyed when they get a Windows update prompt. So we need to have support of senior leadership from the very beginning, because when the head of marketing says, these jerk faces in incident response, I'm going to be awesome because there's a nice young lady here. These jerk faces in incident response made us take down our web server. And that web server was in production, and it had our new product lineup on it, and it was this really cool Adobe Flash website. And it was serving these cool PDFs to our customers that had our product reference guides on them, and now I can't market anything, and you need to stop those incident response people. If your senior leadership knows that you could lose $2.3 million to a data breach, and they had something to say in the construction of the incident response team, they're going to go, those people know what they're doing. We could be losing a lot of money due to a security breach, a lot more than you're going to make selling your one widget that I just rolled for. If you don't have their support, that manager is going to go to the CISO and say, what the heck are you people doing? Why are they shutting down a web server for marketing? We're trying to sell one widget here. What are you doing? Make your team put this server back online. And that could happen. So senior leadership involvement from the very beginning. They need to know what you're trying to build and why you're trying to build it, which is what we've been discussing so far. And we also need to talk about the scope. We've already talked a little bit about what our environment looks like and what we know about our environment, like what are our high-value targets, who might be attacking us, how big our organization is. But we also need to establish some firm scope for our incident response team, which is, what types of incidents are we going to deal with? Are we going to deal with the guy breaking in the window and sneaking along in his balaclava and stealing the computer? I don't know. I see that in pictures a lot, but I assume it happens. Are we going to deal with that, or are we going to deal with only malware? Are we just going to respond to computers that get infected? Are we going to deal with data breaches or theft of financial data? Is that going to be us, or is there going to be another team handling that? Or are we going to work in conjunction with them? So we need to know a scope of what we're going to deal with. And we also need to know when things go wrong, when things really, 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 really get bad. When are we going to get called up? When does the bat signal go up in the sky, the IR signal with the little eye and I want one of those. At what point in the processes are we going to be called up, and are we going to begin our incident response processes? And that could be anywhere from only the Security Operations Center will call us to we are the phone line that people call when there may be a potential data breach. And we need to know how many incidents could occur, because we're going to be discussing our staffing levels with our HR and our finance and our senior leadership teams. So how often do you think we're actually going to have an incident? Are we going to have a major incident every day? Are we dealing with that quantity of malware or of attacks against our network? Or is this something we expect to happen once or twice a year, and we're just going to establish the SWAT team model of incident response program, and we only need to have people come together to handle a couple incidents a year? And this can definitely change over time. And we need to know what tasks, within what types of incidents we're going to respond to, we need to know what tasks we're going to perform in them. Are we going to perform malware analysis? Are we going to actually have a reverser on staff? Or are we just going to send our malware samples over to McAfee or Symantec and have them update their signatures? Are we going to have a expert forensic analyst on staff who can go through hard drives and figure out what happened? Or are we expecting to bring in consultants when we need that done? And we need to know when we're going to do those things and when we're not going to do these things, because there's something called process slippage. Has anybody ever heard of process slippage? Process slippage is one of my favorite terms. Process slippage is when you've been doing XYZ task, and all of a sudden one day your boss calls you up and says, I hear you know HTML. Could you build me a web page? And you're like, well, I work in incident response. And he's like, well, I just need this one page. Can you just update it because nobody over here knows HTML? And you're like, okay, I'll fix your href tags. I can do that. I'm a hacker. I'm pretty cool. And you get the website and you fix his href tag. And then the next week, he's like, in his weekly briefing, he's like, and we have the incident response team in charge of all websites in the IT division now. And you're like, I don't like HTML that much. So that's process slippage. Process slippage is when you have a set of guidelines for what you're going to do when, and people keep adding things onto them that aren't really part of your job. And that's going to happen in the natural occurrence of being in an IT organization. Excuse me, an IT organization where tools change, staffing changes. You are going to have to make changes, and you are going to have to be adaptable in your incident response program. However, you want to have an established set of guidelines for what you're going to do so that you don't have this continual process slippage outside of the procedures that you've written. And you also need to know, finally, like I already beat this one to death, but you need to know whether your IR team, at the most fundamental, is going to be a dedicated team or it's going to be the SWAT team. So these are all the basic things in your scope you need to know to establish your plan. Any questions on that? I guess not. You're all very smart people. So within your scope, when you're talking about these things, you need to think about your time frames for implementing them. And you're going to get suggestions from your senior leadership team when you're establishing an incident response program for how soon they want to be able to respond to XYZ data breach. And you're going to need to bring in somebody who knows whether those are realistic timeframes or not. Who I would recommend for that is not going to be an answer many of you like, because it is the favorite certification of many of us, which is the PMP. I very much suggest you involve a project manager, because that's what they do. They decide whether it's possible to do things in a certain amount of time. And sometimes we don't really like their answers, but that is what they were certified with fancy PMP certification after their name to do. So the bottom line is we need to know whether those timeframes are realistic, whether we can actually do them. We need to know also who our stakeholders are. We've already talked about some stakeholders in our incident response program: senior leadership, risk management, and there's more. More people who are going to be really interested if a bad thing happens and something gets stolen or something gets defaced. There are things like our HR team, maybe our finance team, definitely our risk management team if we have one of those, which I hope we do, and certainly our legal team, who's going to be very, very interested if bad things start happening and things get stolen. And again, I'm coming back to it again. I'm a terrible person, I'm sorry. Budget. We need to know how much money we have to make all these wonderful things happen.
Can you say more about industry standards or some practices, like how much some companies spend depending on their size and revenue?
Sure. So first of all, you need to think about your human capital costs. You need to think about the size of the team. So you're going to assume it depends on the area, the city that you're talking about for incident response. But a good average price for somebody working in incident response, you could guess around $90,000 in most urban areas if you're not in San Francisco or Washington, D.C. So you need to think about your team size, which is probably going to, for a Fortune 500 company, be 15 people. including your security engineering folks. So you're looking at 10 to 15 people at that cost for your staffing levels. And that's just your recurring costs for people's salary and benefits. You also need to consider your tool costs. So there's going to be the question of whether you have a SOC that has a SIM already, because SIMs get very pricey. You're talking upwards of $500,000 to $1 million possibly for a SIM or log aggregation solution. And there's also equipment and incidental software costs. So you need to think about things like malware reversing tools and forensic tools. What kind of security architecture do you have in place already? Do you have an IDS? Do you have a modern firewall solution? So those costs might come in as well if you don't have those solutions already. But the most cost in the incident response team itself is going to be the human capital, the people's salaries who you have working on your incident response team. I don't know if that kind of answers your question, but it really depends on the organization and how many people you have working for you.
Yeah, that helps that, unless companies on the revenue they make.
I've seen incident response teams at large organizations as large as 40 people. Was there another question? Okay. So our budget again, and my answer to him, which was a wonderful question, was again kind of my it depends answer. Depending on all the things that we've talked about, the size of the organization and what our roles are, what functions we're performing. And then finally, what does our network look like? We already talked about heterogeneous versus homogeneous networks. Do we have a clear-cut architecture for our network with a common operating system and build across it, or is everything different everywhere? And do we have to plan for 100 different builds, 100 different server architectures, and 100 different group policies across our environment? So that's going to exponentially increase the time and the budget required to build our incident response program. And we need to know, again, how big the network is. Are we dealing with a Fortune 10? Are we dealing with a company with 50 to 100 employees? If you have an organization that has 50 to 100 employees, you'll be lucky if you have one dedicated security person. And in that case, you really do have to have the incident response SWAT team concept. You have to have a couple people from IT and your security person, and maybe a legal person, maybe a risk management person, who know that they'll work together and how they'll work together using a set of defined procedures if things get bad. But you're not going to have the luxury of having a dedicated team of 8 to 10 people like you might in a Fortune 1000 or Fortune 500 company. And again, it's going to also depend on those high-value targets which we have identified. What are we securing? Are we securing one engineering lab? Are we securing a ton of public-facing web servers like an Akamai or something? How big is the surface that we have to respond to? That's also going to influence the number of incidents we have to deal with, but it's going to influence the number of procedures and the number of processes we have as well. So if we're securing web servers, we're going to have somebody on our team that has the experience and the exposure in evaluating securing web servers. If we're only securing our internal network, we might only have to have forensic analysis on Windows hosts. But if we're dealing with Linux servers as well, all of a sudden we have to have somebody with experience in doing analysis on Linux. So where are the things that people might want to attack, and what do we need to do to deal with them if they are? And finally, travel and global business requirements. This sounds a little strange, but a lot of us work for global companies, and incident response is going to look a lot different if we're traveling to it. So if you work for a company that has offices in 50 countries, how are you going to get your incident responders to those countries if something goes wrong? Do you think you're going to be able to do all your analysis over the wire? What if you can't? What if you can't get a hard drive out of a country? That happens. Customs restrictions are varied across the world. There's going to be some places where it takes 3 to 4 weeks to get a piece of electronics out of the country if it doesn't get tactically acquired by customs on its way out. There's going to be networks that are very, very slow in some offices across the world. They're going to have terrible latency and packet loss, and you're going to have a lot of trouble doing analysis over them. Are there restrictions on where you can do analysis? Russia just changed their data storage regulations so that if you do business in Russia, within a couple years, you're going to have all of their data stored in Russia. You can't export it out. So if you're doing business in Russia, I feel bad for you, son. No, but we have to establish that right off the bat as we're establishing our incident response plan structure. Are we going to be traveling to 50 countries? Are we going to have to tell our employees when we hire them that they could travel at any time? Are they going to have to be ready to go in 24 hours? That's a huge inconvenience. That's especially talking about people who have families. All of a sudden you're telling them in the interview that, oh, have your bag ready to go, because if there's an incident in Lithuania, you're going to have to get on a plane within 24 hours and be on site, because that's the service level agreement we have as an incident response team. And do you have enough staffing to do that? Can you send somebody away for 2 weeks to another country and still run at your normal level in your home SOC? Especially when you're dealing with the SWAT team concept of incident response, that becomes really critical. If you are pulling people in from other departments, if one of the people on your incident response team is normally your exchange administrator, can you send him to Lithuania for 2 weeks? Is that realistic? Have you planned for a scenario where you're going to have to send them out of the country? And that even goes for people inside the same country, even inside the United States. Can you actually live without this person in their home office for 2 weeks? Are you going to have adequate staffing if you have to send them away to handle an incident? And finally, the one thing I didn't note in this slide is the cost of travel. If you're going to have people sent on site to do forensics or malware analysis every week, that travel cost is going to add up. Did you build that into your budget? As he mentioned, what are the costs? That's another cost that could arise in doing incident response. If you have to send people on site regularly, there's going to be extensive travel costs. But the good things that we have, there are some good things. I'm telling you these horrible negative things about your company's going to be hacked and they're going to steal a bunch of things and your senior leadership is going to not let you take down the web server. But there's good things too, because in our organizations we already have some things we can work with. We already have a box of Lego blocks. They're not very matched, they're not from the same set, but we can put all those Lego blocks together and we can make something cool out of it. So we already have human capital. We probably already have people inside our company who are doing functions related to incident response. And we talked about some of those. We talked about our existing loss prevention folks, maybe our physical security folks. They're already doing security. They're already responding to incidents. Our legal people definitely are. They're probably trained at some point in what to do if there's a data breach. Our HR team is dealing with bad people all the time. Our HR team is going to love us because they like firing people. I know it. I just know it. They do. And our loss prevention team, oh man, they're going to have a field day having an incident response team. They're going to be like, wow, look at all these people stealing things. So we have all these people already, and we might even have a SOC who's doing a large portion of what incident responders do. They're doing the detection of security stuff on the network. They're doing analysis of malware. Maybe they're doing some forensics. So we're going to sit there while we're building our procedures, and we're going to think of all these resources we already have inside our organization. Do we have information assurance? They might have policies and procedures for some of these things written out already. So we're also going to inventory the tools that we have. If we have a SOC, we might already have a SIM. So that's $1 million we don't have to spend there on a SIM or a log aggregation solution. We might already have some malware analysis and forensics tools deployed. You can usually spend $500,000 on a forensics deployment, so that's fantastic if our legal or our SOC teams have that. We might already have virtualization environments or other things we need to construct security tools. So we have a lot of things that we can work with, hopefully, in our environment already. But it's a matter of talking to these various teams and seeing what they have and what they're willing to share as you establish incident response. And again, the more homogeneous our environment is, the more we're using the same tools, the cheaper and easier it's going to be to do response. Because if the e-discovery team is using one forensic tool and you're using another tool, not only have you just deployed 2 different listeners on every host in your company to listen for forensics connections, if they have to pull an image in the dead of night for you and you can't read that image because they have FTK format and you have NCase format, you've just caused yourself unnecessary money and time. And you're excused. You're definitely excused. Yeah, so we're gonna evaluate what we've got in our environment already, and we're gonna try not to duplicate our tools and our resources. We're gonna try to bring them into the incident response program, because we're not building a program in a bubble. We're building it within an organization that already exists. And as we're identifying those high-value targets that we talked about, we're going to sit there with those various teams, the loss prevention and the HR teams and the legal teams. And again, we're going to discuss what do people want to steal. And I suggested a few things, but that could be very different depending on the industry that you're in. There's going to be different things that somebody wants to steal from a defense contractor than they're going to want to steal from a bank, obviously. I think most of you can think of what those things might be. But some things that might be stolen out of any organization are financial data, privacy information about customers or employees, trade secrets, customer data. But bad people want to do other things too. I talked a little about hacktivism and what happens when you make Anonymous not like you anymore, like DDoSes and defacement. And those are incidents we might have to deal with too. So we're going to bring all those representatives from all those different teams and groups together, and we're going to say, based on all these pieces of information we've gathered, we think that we work in banking of widgets, and we think that people might want to steal our widgets, our one widget. So we're going to definitely want to focus an incident response team on what happens if somebody steals our widget. But if you work in defense contracting, they might want to steal your widget plane. And if somebody wants to steal your widget plane, you might have to have an incident response team to deal with widget plane being stolen as well. And finally, as I mentioned before, we're going to identify our adversaries, because our adversaries give us insight into how we prepare our incident response team. Because once we know who our adversaries are, we enter into the e-enemy threat intelligence space. Again, please go watch Ian Amit's talk from yesterday when you get home, if you haven't seen it. But once we know who those people are who might want to do those things, and we know what they might want to steal, we have lots of threat intelligence avenues open to us to kind of use that threat intelligence to develop our incident response team. What I mean by that is, if we know they want to steal our widgets, and we know you might want to steal all of our widgets, we can go to our industry peer groups and we can say, we know this what's your name?
Josh.
We know Josh has been stealing a lot of widgets. It's advanced threat actor Josh has been stealing lots and lots of widgets from widget companies. I want to get some intelligence on how threat actor Josh steals widgets. So we're going to go to our industry peers and we're going to say, you had some widgets stolen by threat actor Josh. What malware did he use? What did it look like when his network connections went out? How long did it take him to steal those widgets, and which widgets did he want to steal? And our industry peers are probably there's a lot of cooperation going on now. Our industry partners are probably and peers are going to say, yeah, we saw threat actor Josh. He's big trouble. We lost 3.2 million monies to threat actor Josh, and that happened. Here's some indicators of compromise. It took us 20 months to figure out that threat actor Josh was in our network, and by that time he had dumped all the passwords from our domain controller, and he had stolen a bunch of widgets. But he only wanted red widgets. He didn't want blue widgets. So I don't think that threat actor Josh is interested in blue widgets. He only likes red one because he's wearing a red shirt. Why are you wearing a red shirt? That's really dangerous. Hasn't anybody told you that's dangerous? Anyway, so we go to our industry peers and we get all this information about threat actor Josh, who we think is going to be targeting us too. And we might ask them, do you know of any other threat actors who are targeting us too, our industry too? And they might say, what's this gentleman's name? Threat actor Derek has been stealing some widgets too. He's been stealing the blue widgets, and threat actor Eric steals them a little bit differently. He stole them overnight. He just sent a phishing email, and then he stole some widgets, and then he was kind of done. So we know all these things about these threat actors that are targeting widgets now. And when we're constructing our incident response plan, we can think about our industry and our industry partners and the data they've given us and say, we need to plan to be able to detect phishing emails, definitely, because we know that threat actor Eric is using phishing emails. And we need to be able to detect the malware types, like he's got some really sneaky malware. Did you know that you have really sneaky malware? You have really sneaky malware. I mean, it makes your hash dumpers make Mimi cats look like my pet tabby cat. It's just, he's got some really cool malwares, and they're really good at stealing. Widgets and not being detected. So we need to make sure that we've got a really good host IDS solution, and we're monitoring command line execution, and that we're logging all that in a way that we can read and monitor. So, and that might be entirely different given a different industry. In the medical industry, we might be worrying about people compromising medical devices or stealing HIPAA data. And the way we respond to that and the things we expect to happen might be entirely different. And, what did I say there? What did I say at 2 in the morning? I said if you're securing and monitoring one area really well and ignoring another, well, you're really not securing anything. So, again, we want to have a well-rounded plan, and as well as looking at the very specific actors that may be targeting our industry, we also want to have a well-rounded security response plan that can respond to normal types of security incidents, like malware is a huge one. Everybody's network is vulnerable to malware. Everyone's network is vulnerable to phishing, unless you don't have email, which would be cool. I'm pretty sure everybody has email, though. Can we just take that away? Can we just take email away from people? But there's certain types of security incidents that could apply to any industry, and we have to have plans for those as well. And we've established that we've brought all these teams together, tons and tons of teams. We've got our legal, we've got our lawyers in there, lawyers, very serious people, very fancy dressed people, very hard to be in a room with them, but we have to do that. We've got our lawyers in there, we've got our HR people just waiting to fire people, we've got our loss prevention people going, oh my God, look at all these people stealing stuff, and we've got our IR people, and we've got our senior leadership, and they're all in a room. And we have to, at that point, decide that throughout the construction of this incident response procedure, we're going to continue communicating. We're going to have regular meetings with all of these involved stakeholders. We're going to make sure that in the event of an incident actually occurring, we know who to call in each one of those teams who's a stakeholder in incident response. And that includes the incidents that happen over the holidays, because nobody ever attacks anybody over the holidays when they know they're out of the office. That never happens. And we need to be able to page them out at 2 in the morning. So that means we, unfortunately, are going to need their home telephone numbers so that we can wake up their kids and spouses, like the terrible people that we incident responders are. I'm trying to tell you why everybody hates us and why you have to have senior leadership support. This is another reason, because we wake up everybody. So we need to have those really good contact and communication plans ready to go, so that when it's 2 in the morning and things go really wrong, the incident responder and incident handler aren't sitting there on the phone desperately trying to reach people who don't pick up. And at that point, they have to start making decisions on their own. If they can't reach somebody in senior leadership, and a web server is compromised, and they can't reach the website administrator, it's up to the incident responder and the incident response procedure at that point whether they're going to take the website down. They have to make that critical business decision based entirely on the existing written procedure and their own brain, which is risky for their career. That could be a career-limiting move for the incident responder. So 2 things. You need to have a really well-written plan that gives them guidance in what to do in that situation, and you need to have a really good communication plan so that they know they'll have somebody to reach if they have to make a multi-million-dollar decision like that during an incident. And it will be a multi-million-dollar decision. You're deciding whether to take down a major website or let it keep distributing malware to your customers or to your partners or to your vendors. And that's the kind of decision we face in incident response. Those massive business critical decisions, things being stolen, major systems on a network being compromised. We are the ones who have to make those decisions using the tools we've been provided. So in the incident response plan, the more tools and resources we can give the incident responders, the better situation they and the safety of their careers will be in. And it's too much to ask. You're hiring an incident response team. You're hiring people to do incident response and to be good at forensics and good at detective work and good at resolving incidents. You're not hiring them to make major risk management decisions in your organization without support that could limit their career or even get them fired. That's not what we're hiring them to do. That's too much to ask of a human being. So we want to make sure that those contact lists for all of the teams, all of the stakeholders who are going to be involved in incident response are updated regularly. We're going to want to make sure that they contain multiple options if one person isn't available, if they're out of the country, or if they're sick, if they're hospitalized, there's somebody else to call, a second-tier person and maybe a third-tier person. And we want to have those up to date and available to anybody doing incident response, especially in our SWAT team scenario where the people aren't quite as familiar with doing incident response. And finally, we want to condense everything that we talked about. This is the hard part. Okay, you guys, I know this is like an English 101 thing. It's terrible. We want to make a mission statement. And that mission statement is going to sum up all the things we just talked about. What do we do? Who does it? And what are our procedures to do it, in 1 to 3 sentences. And that mission statement is going to be what we put on the very front of our incident response procedures. Before any of our other checklists or procedures or appendices, we're going to write a mission statement. And it's not going to be very long. It's not going to be more than a paragraph. It's going to describe the purpose and function of our team. For instance, my example here is develop a team reporting to the CIO. So we said who it's reporting to. We've got our hierarchy here, which will provide first-class incident response and digital forensic services. So we've established what we're doing. To Clovis Bray's internal networks with staffing on a 24/7 basis. And we've said when we're doing it. Now we're going to go into more detail in our procedure, much more detail about what we're doing for Clovis Bray's networks. But at the very most fundamental level, that is our mission statement. That is what we can present to senior leadership and tell them, this is what our incident response team does. This is what they don't do. We're not saying anything here about performing malware analysis. We're not going to hire a reverser. That's not what our team does. Our team provides first-class incident response and digital forensic services. And we report to the CIO. We don't report to the head of marketing. And we don't report to the head of engineering much to his chagrin. So we're going to write a mission statement. And it's not going to be super detailed, but it's going to be enough to tell our management chain what we do and what we don't do. And it's going to be easy to email and present, and all of our other documentation and our procedures are going to stay within that scope. That's our scope right there. And the final caveat on this section of building the plan, of planning out a plan, is that your incident response program needs to be adaptable. Things are going to change over time. So these variables that we talked about, the size of our company, our budget, the tools we use, the people involved, those can all change over time. Companies change. Our market changes. Our industry might change. And we need to be prepared for that. So we plan for those changes, but we want to always make those changes in a documented way. So that means we don't just do our process slippage and add on tasks. What we do is we have a plan in the process that says, if our industry changes, we will do X, Y, Z, and we will involve these stakeholders to change our incident response plan in accordance with, and we'll make an addendum to our plan. If our contact list changes, this is a procedure we use to update the contact list to make sure that the data stays current and that we have accurate people and we have enough contacts that work for our incident response process. So we have a procedure to change our procedure, and yes, that's getting a little redundant and a little unpleasant and businessy, but it's something we need to do to avoid that process slippage. So that brings us to our first exercise. And hopefully everybody's found a group of 4 in here, and if you need to push desks together, whatever, I don't mind at all. Again, for people who came in late, groups of 4, we can have a group of 3 if we need to, if we're short one person. I'm going to be handing out these worksheets. And these worksheets have an exercise that happened to our fake company, which is Renraku Company. And again, we are playing with D&D dice here. So what you're going to need to get is a D20, a 20-sided dice, and a 6-sided dice. Very complicated. If you don't have a pen, there's some up here and there's some in the back. So I'm going to hand each group a copy of this exercise, and where it says roll a dice, it's going to say roll a 6-sided dice or roll a 20-sided dice. You're going to roll a dice, hope you're lucky, and fill in the number. Then you're going to read through your scenario and see what's happened to you. On the back side of the sheet, there's some questions. And there's some questions about your version of Renraku Company. And in this first exercise, we're just going to establish what the company looks like and what you think the answers to some of these scope questions are going to be and why that scope could be a problem. So we're going to take about 10-15 minutes, as much as time as you all need to roll out your company and discuss the questions. And then when everybody's done, we're going to go ahead and each group is going to have a person stand up and tell us about your version of Renraku Company and how you answered each question in your situation. It's going to be different for every group. And like I mentioned before, none of these questions require technical answers. If there's any technical detail you don't understand in the scenario, feel free to ask me. I'm also acting as Renraku's CISO, so if you want to ask a question that isn't on the sheet about Renraku Company, you are more than welcome to ask me, and I will answer you, as well as their very technical CISO. Very technical CISO answers it. So basically no guarantees. Renraku is a medium-sized business. It's got 4,500 employees. It is a global company, though. They have offices in multiple countries. And they are building their first dedicated incident response team. So they're not using the SWAT team structure. They're a big enough company that they want to dedicate a team of 10 people. to incident response roles. And we talked about what some of those roles are previously. And we'll talk about those more in the next exercise where we start hiring those people. But in this first exercise, we're just going to talk about the problems that Renraku has. Because Renraku, they haven't been doing so well. They've had a few data breaches recently. That's why they're building an incident response team. They used to call a certain high-profile incident response company to do consulting work for them. And that company's pretty cool and does a lot of targeted threat response, but they're charging them a whole bunch of money. So the Renraku CSO is a guy named Mr. Lanier, and Mr. Lanier is he's a hacksaw. He's definitely a hacksaw. He knows hacksaw-y things. He even ran Metasploit one time. He thought it was pretty cool. He didn't pop a shell though. It didn't work. He's not really sure why it didn't work, but he's going to take a SANS class someday. But he wants to build this incident response team, and he's got some requirements for it that are on the exercise sheet, and he's brought in your consulting firm to help him build it. So if you can just let me know what group you're in, or if one person from each group wants to grab one of these, probably be just as easy. I'll put them up here. And then you can pick out your own color dice that way, because I know everybody's going to be really picky about whether they have a pink die or not. The good ones are the pink ones, but you didn't hear that from me. So if one person from every group wants to grab a pencil and a copy of exercise 1.
Future, if you want.
Oh, you have to hold it for a minute. Okay. I wasn't that worried about it. I can point at things. So I apologize to everybody on the video. We're going to take about 15 minutes working on this exercise. So it's going to be rather dull for you, and hopefully Iron Geek cuts the video to the discussion. If not, you can watch Funny Cats for 15 minutes.
This is how many security
And it's no fun if you cheat, so don't only roll one time, because it's no fun if you cheat. Don't drop it on the floor. Let me pull up the exercise so people can see it. Of the class total. It depends on how long it takes people to finish these exercises. I'm hoping for 3 hours. It's supposed to run 4 hours, but I'm thinking we don't have as many groups as I expected, so it should only take 3 hours to run through the answers to these. But I'm going to try to finish it as quickly as I can with everybody's questions answered. Go ahead, yeah. Do you need a pencil? pencil or a pen? Okay, great.
So go ahead. Okay.
Yeah, just go ahead and answer the questions, and these things you just decided are going to run through the entire exercise. So your company's going to stay, so your company is going to be a news media company for the rest of the exercises. And so these things are going to remain the same. Those are your constants for Renraku now. Sure, of course. As many copies as you want. Here's another copy if you want it. If you guys need more copies, here you go. This might be easier. If you guys need more copies, here's some more copies. A little easier to read that way. Have some more copies. If you need more copies, if it's easier to read, there you go.
Here's some of the threats you think are 12 a year.
Oh no! Oh no! Oh dear! Oh goodness!
You should see our number. Nothing is below 12. So.
Oh dear! Oh my goodness! Well, that's actually for the industry. That's kind of realistic. That sounds like a true situation.
What is that? I mean, it's just
geologic data when you're looking for looks like there might be.
So I would, if they're very profitable, that would be as far as regulation, what I would see.
Oh yes, they are publicly traded. They are. Renraku is publicly traded.
Like in the U.S. media,
He wanted me
me to, with the lecture portion, he wanted me to stop recording here.
Oh yeah, there's going to be they've been working for a little while now, so they'll probably have to cut it out. I'm doing the exercises in the middle of it. There's 3 of them, so there are about 15 minutes of them talking, and then 15 minutes of discussion that you will want to catch on the tape. So they've got about 5 more minutes on this exercise, and then we'll be back
I guess
to.
he needs to cut this part out then.
He's probably going to need to come out because there's just going to be like 3 15-minute segments in the middle where they're working on the exercise.
He just came in here and told me to turn it off.
Sorry. No, it's cool.
Do we sell it as non-biased or biased storytelling?
Basically, it's non-IT employees handling financial.
Damage to the
I put like lots of hours into
What kind of that?
Oh, that'll be an interesting one. You guys have about 10 minutes left, okay? 10 minutes.
Now, Dave is talking about
It could be the physical security, could be put to a different setting and put it or call out.
You guys have a question? God, they're Googling things.
Have access to the areas that are within
Well, I mean, I guess I'm guessing that's like, I mean,
You guys have 5 minutes.
That's the only safety and security. What is the information? There's computer or something that they go by initiative or the laptop store, you know, we have. Yeah, police report as well. It's different.
The CISO reports to the CEO. He does not report to the CIO. He reports directly to the CEO.
So basically, sir, once the CISO has read, we do forensic analysis from here. That's going to be part of the standard.
So we do forensics, malware analysis, and service line. It's 24/7. And what's our goal? Is to protect.
Which?
The 13 employees protecting all the software.
Yeah, I can believe it. Yep.
You're right. You need to have like someone in the team
All right, you guys, we're about at time. Is everybody finished up? Anybody have any more questions to finish? Okay. Everybody set? Anybody need another minute? 1 minute. Okay. It's good. It's become an intense debate. They're supposed to give them 15 minutes and they're still arguing.
Close it as long as it's locked, and I'll pick up stuff later on. We even set this stop recording to make it stop.
Okay.
I'm gonna go upstairs and get.
Okay. Have fun. You can name your consulting firm if you like, because there will be prizes for the most interesting answers. Notice that I say most interesting.
Because especially multinational.
I was thinking, you like that. It probably helps storage. They work for compromise the calendar. They're going to have access to the drives.
and subsidiaries.
Found at one of our 17 locations and we talked to any of the other locations.
All right, is any group ready to go? Has any group finished all the questions? All right, so what we're going to do, and if anybody's finishing up, you can continue to finish up, is if one person from your group would like to introduce your version of, your consulting firm if you would like, introduce your version of Renraku, what industry they work in, what's been happening to them, and then how you answered each one of the questions briefly. So if there's somebody from your group who would like to, okay?
We have a client that's in the news media industry that has had 4 breaches within over the last 12 months. It has taken us 7 months to detect their breaches. They're in 2 countries, and they have 17 subsidies that have unrestricted connections to all of the internal networks. So some of the threats that come to our news media company is they could have classified information that they've acquired through their reporting sources.
Sure.
They could have other nations that are not happy with the biasness of how they're reporting on stuff or sending out reports to the media. Just the sources that our reporters are talking to, just those contact information are just some of the threats that we could easily identify today.
Sure.
Some of our high-value targets we feel would be our web server. If people are not happy with the reports that we've published, they might like to deface us and put their spin on the world for a couple hours for us. Our social media accounts with the same issue. Any type of data that we have, either be it on a SANS, on a database, on reporters' devices such as mobile phones, laptops, or just some of the high-value targets that we could distinguish. When we're building the incident response team, the people that we would like to have at the table would be our CISO, our legal team, our HR. We want to have people from our SOCs to provide us with data sets that they could have captured.
Sure.
Our loss prevention team, any sysadmins for doing changes that are needed in a relatively quick nature. Marketing to respin our news media to make sure that it wasn't our fault, of course.
Okay.
And then since we have such a large amount of subsidies, we would like leaders from each subsidy because their environments are completely different and we need experts in each of those areas.
Okay.
And then our mission statement would be, under the direction of the CISO, Ruku IR team will respond to physical and digital security incidents to the company's internal networks with staffing on a 24-hour basis.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So that was a very interesting news media version of Renraku, where they're having to deal with defacement and people stealing their WikiLeaks data. So that's a very interesting solution to that. What other group is ready to go? All right.
Can I make one small statement? If I use a troll killed or something else in D&D, she is...
Awesome. I can't wait to see how this one ended up. All right. Oh boy. Yeah, you want to roll lows. You want those 1s in this one, not the 20s.
All right, so we are... So we're representing Bob, Bang Alpha Flow Consulting.
Cool.
We are consulting for Renaku, who is who's in the oil, gas, and electric industry. Specifically, we focus on the oil industry.
Okay.
We have had 18 major security incidents.
Ooh.
It took us 12 months on average. We operate in 20 different countries.
Oh my God.
We have 19 subsidiaries. so some major threat actors that we face. Obviously, nation state. We do a lot in the Middle East. We have a lot of nation states. Hacktivism. Every once in a while we have oil spills. People don't like that.
You sure do.
Yeah, they deface our website, stuff like that. Insiders are a really big one on ours. Some other companies that kind of use it. The next one with espionage. Not so pleasant either. It's kind of a competitive market, and then also terrorism.
Oh yeah, you do operate in Iran.
Yeah.
Good job. That's nice.
So some high-value targets, we kind of focus on three main ones. We have a lot of research into where we're going to drill index, different ways that we obtain our physical product, all of our competitors and everybody's trying to get that information. All of our production targets, anything from a physical product, our refineries, to our trucks. If we lose a tanker, that's not a small dime to us, but it's still a lot of money for us. And then again, our financial assets as well. We have a lot of money that comes in and out of our company on a day-to-day basis. For our outside teams, we do a lot of work with governments, IT, the media, investment relations, HR, legal. And then our mission statement is to respond and investigate physical and security incidences 24/7 for NACU and report painful findings to the CISO.
Okay. That is our very interesting oil and gas company operating in every country in the world that produces gas. With every company that produces gas. All right, who wants to go next? Okay, go ahead. Cool.
So we are the Rinraku chain of retail stores. We have had.
What do you sell?
Retail
Widgets. Hopefully you sell more than one widget.
We have had 6 major security incidents in the last 12 months. It took 9 months to discover the last one. We operate in 9 countries and have 12 subsidiaries with different system configs that have direct access to our network. So some threats that Rinraku retail might face is our point of sale would be a target, as well as any e-commerce presence that we have. We do have a higher proportion of non-tech savvy employees who are
yes, you do.
Be more susceptible to phishing and things like that. And compared to our company size and global presence, the IR team size is fairly small.
Yeah, it is.
It's a bit more staff, and also we have a very heterogeneous system makeup. So, given our small size, we each have to know kind of a lot.
Well, the market for widgets has been kind of going downhill since last Christmas, but you're hoping it'll pick up next year. Maybe you can hire some more people for your IR team next year if you get out of the red on Black Friday.
Yeah, it's going to save us this year.
Yeah.
Some of the high value targets, customer databases. We've got a pretty solid rewards program that a lot of people sign up for. It's just begging to be misappropriated. Point of sale, card skimming, and our store card database. Like if we've got higher income clients that have high limit store cards, people can leverage that.
Absolutely.
So people can steal the credit card numbers and sell or use the personally identifiable information for identity theft, things like that. So as we're building out the incident response plan, we're going to be working with any other IT teams. We've acquired quite a number of smaller chains over the time.
Sure.
And they all do their own thing, and so we're probably going to have to work with them a lot. Physical security and loss prevention, we do actually have those departments already, given our retail nature. Legal team and HR definitely involved, risk management. We do already work with the SOC and help desk for all those different business units, so that we don't have to go and deploy changes to all the wacky desktops. So the 1 to 3 sentence mission statement. I'll get to it. 10-man team of technicians that reports to CISO that is responsible for 24/7 by 365 timely and accurate detection and mitigation of physical and digital security incidents relating to Renraku's internal network and assets.
Okay. So that's the retail chain of widget stores that's part of the Renraku company. Is there a staff person here who knows if we can get an extra microphone so that people on the video can hear people's answers? Anybody in staff know? I just wanted to check so that they'll be able to hear what you guys are reading, because they're very good answers. Is there a group who wants to go next? Okay.
So we are in a hospital.
A hospital. Renraku Hospital.
Hospital with one major security incident.
Nice. Good job. Oh. But it was your entire patient record set.
And spread across 18 countries, with one subsidiary with different system configurations and software.
That's good.
So I'm sure they spun that off as big complex things. The threats that we might face would, of course, be people coming after health information, that sort of thing. Possibly web decrease and that, but our focus would have been on patient records.
Okay.
High-value targets. We came up with, anything external facing, web servers, definitely, possibly if they're using it as an entry point. Going to be going after customer record databases, internal computers, since you have people in the hospital walking around, receptionist desks, and the other devices they use around the hospital, so you're getting access for the drugs, and any networks, treatment equipment, or
What could be a risk posed to that medical equipment?
That's still running Windows XP.
You're helping the competition here, you know.
It would be for health records or for manipulating medicine and that type of thing. Wasn't thinking on that.
Okay.
So outside teams we would consult would obviously be legal, compliance, physical security for the devices on premises, and risk reduction.
Okay.
For a mission statement was to develop an IR team, report to the CISO, provide 24/7 support globally with the ability to respond instantly to any.
So I would make a suggestion for that mission statement. You probably don't want to respond instantly. You might want to push that up to 15 or 20 minutes.
Yeah.
I can't respond anywhere instantly. I'm just not that good yet. When I get those teleportation skills down, I definitely will. All right, I think we have another group in here. Yes.
All right, we defense contractor.
Oh, we got one of each.
They had 12 major security incidents in the last 12 months.
Oh, shame on them.
7 months is the number of months it took to detect their last compromise. Operates in one country.
U.S.
And we have 12 subsidiaries with different system configurations and software ownership connections to the internal network. Some of the threats that we might face would be defacement, DDoS, data exfil by either nation states or corporate competitors.
Sure.
With that, we have like insider threats, to walk out, natural disasters, and supply chain disruptions. High-value targets is any prototypes, file servers sitting with blueprints possible blueprints on them, purchasing department, and our government liaisons. The outside teams would be legal, physical sec, the purchasing team, senior management, marketing, and risk management teams. And then this statement is develop a team reporting to CISO, which will provide exceptional 24/7 incident response, malware analysis, and digital forensic services to Rocky's U.S. networks and subsidiaries.
Okay. So can you explain a little bit why you wanted to bring those particular teams? Why did you want to bring in marketing? And
Marketing is for crisis management, so given that we have government affiliation, so working information.
So, all right. So your PR team in case of data breach, break glass. Okay. All right. Very interesting. Was that every group? I believe so. Oh yes. So
Red Rock Group for us has oil, gas, and
okay.
They are a very major global corporation, and in the past 12 months have gone through 4 major security incidents.
Okay.
However, it took them 18 months for us to compromise. And there are 15 countries they operate in.
Sure.
With 18 different subsidiaries and system configurations. So they are facing a challenge, but that's why they're it.
Absolutely.
We determined that some of the threats that Red Rock Group faces in the oil, gas, and electricity that they're involved in are activism due to trafficking and environmental.
Oh yes, they are. Greenpeace is really mad at them.
So there's possible defacements or media and online. There's also the risk of their sensitive data, research data, client clouds, and any government dealings being accessed and believed to be wrong parties. The critical systems, ICS and SCADA, are definitely at high risk.
Oh yes.
And the electricity grid is also a very choice target for anybody, possibly nation states, that would like to engage in them, or hirings by nation states to create or express something. The other risk is that the ICS systems are like the legacy systems and are at risk themselves for maintenance, and thereby bringing the electricity distribution into conflict.
Okay.
Some high-value targets we consider are the research and review data, contracts, and work done through the government or arrangements made with governments. Any other sensitive corporate client data that we currently have is very privileged. And then the distribution lines themselves, the pipelines, the rail lines, and the shipping, all of these are very vulnerable and choice targets for attack. In terms of building out our incident response line, the key members that we want to bring in on the team would be the ICS SCADA experts and the engineering team as well, so that we can look at how we build and address the actual physical structures. The legal team, the risk management team, the financial team. We, of course, will have the SOC in there because there's a lot of digital connections to be maintained and work with those online. We will need to have a representative from FEMA, hazmat, and outside emergency response. If there are any physical attacks that occur,
sure,
be a result of. And what we would consider the oversight committee to address environmental damage and repercussions. And I would have the communications team that will have to address the media.
Okay.
As well as anything that's disseminated from this. And we will need to have a representative from each subsidiary because we have to be able to deal with each of these 18 different systems at the same time. Our mission statement is that this IR team is will report to the McGraco CISO and provide timely and expert response to digital forensic services on a 24/7 and 365 basis in response to any physical and digital security issues for the record.
Okay. What I really liked about that is that you brought in not only the government agencies who would respond to either an oil spill or some kind of other environmental disaster, but you also brought in your SCADA people, you brought in your ICS people who are going to be really critical in the oil and gas industry because you're going to be dealing with proprietary systems in your pipelines or power systems. So those are all really good answers. I really like that we've got a sampling of all the different industries here, and you're going to keep those industries for the rest of these exercises. And you're also going to keep the sometimes good and sometimes not so fun situation that your company has been in with 20 data breaches in a year. For exercise 2 and exercise 3, we're gonna build out the team a little bit more for Mr. Lanier, the CISO.
When are we required to bring law enforcement?
So, it depends on the country that you're operating in and the kind of data that you're dealing with. There's not a lot of requirements for breach disclosure in a lot of countries so far. It's starting to crop up more. We're starting to see more requirements to disclose financial breaches as well as data breaches starting to appear, and there's a lot of legislation in play right now that's going to come out probably within the next couple of years that say if you've had a data breach, you have to disclose it to XYZ agencies and within a certain time frame. To bring in law enforcement, though, it might depend on the industry you're in. If you're in a medical field, we have our company that's in a hospital, they're going to have disclosure requirements due to HIPAA. They're going to have to disclose patient data record breaches to law enforcement. Your people who work in defense contracting obviously are going to be working with possibly sensitive or classified data, and they're going to have a requirement to disclose to law enforcement if there's a breach. And then your oil and gas industry, they're definitely going to have a requirement to disclose in certain countries. So it depends on the industry you're in, but that's becoming more universal all the time. The requirement to disclose data breaches, especially data breaches over a certain amount of money. So we can get away with not disclosing for the moment in certain instances, but don't expect that to last much longer. Does anybody else have any questions, comments about this exercise, about any answers you liked, any answers you disagreed with? Go ahead.
It's more of a general question.
Sure.
Deal with the countries that, correct me if I'm wrong, there are some European countries that are very sensitive about what data goes in and out.
Oh, yes.
How do you deal with countries like that? I mean, I'm assuming that you're team to those countries, but then do they confiscate your laptop on the way out?
So the requirement for Europe, when you're talking about forensics, is usually that you can't have a data that can be correlated to a user, that's directly correlated to a user. So that's not necessarily saying that you can't do analysis out of the same country. That's not necessarily telling you that you can't do remote forensics on those systems, although in some countries you do need to do forensics on local systems, which also doesn't mean you can't remotely connect to those systems and then keep the data inside the country. But the requirement is a little more obtuse than that. It's you can't have host names that have the people's names in them. You can't have traffic that's logged with people's personal names. That doesn't mean you can't have firewall logs or you can't have proxy logs. It means that you can't have those logs be identifiable as a specific user in your records. So the long answer is you can't. The short answer is you can do analysis of European systems for the most part in most countries outside of Europe. The longer answer is you need to bring in when you're setting up your incident response team. That's one of the teams you're going to bring in when you're discussing doing analysis in Europe and in countries in Asia that have these kinds of privacy restrictions on data. You're going to bring in your lawyers and you're going to figure out what you need to do differently in those countries. So that can be everything from changing your host names so that they're not identifiable or trackable to a user, to changing what you log at your firewalls or you log at your proxies so you can't immediately identify a user's network traffic as a specific person. That doesn't mean that you can't trace it back to a user, especially given legal permission in cases that have merit. But you may need to bring in a legal representative in certain countries to perform forensics on those systems. But it's definitely possible to do. Even without flying somebody out to those countries. Now, what's going to happen in countries like Russia that have so severely limited data retention to remain inside their country? I can't say yet. That's new ground, dealing with Russia and having to keep all of their staffing data inside Russia. We really don't know what's going to happen with that yet. People are building out for it to duplicate data center structures there, but who knows what impact that'll have with us doing business with Russia. Make sense? Sure. So the next thing that we're going to discuss, and we'll take a break after I get through this section of slides, so I know people want to go to the bathroom and get a drink and stuff. So I'm going to try to bust through this section, and then we're going to take a little break. So the next thing we're going to talk about is staffing. And we've already kind of talked about that. We've talked about the types of job roles that we had in our immediate IR team. And this is not our extended team that brings in legal and brings in loss prevention and brings in corporate communications. These are the people who are on our team, whether it be a fixed team or a SWAT team, who we bring together and we perform incident analysis with. So our incident response specific roles. So I've kind of drawn them out for you here. I have the two roles at the top, of course, are the incident responders and incident handlers, which, as we recall, are not the same things, but they work in conjunction to work on an incident. And the incident handler is reporting to your senior leadership in corporate communications. They're doing the human interfacing, while your incident responder associates with all the technical people who are doing the analysis on the incident, and perhaps your extended team of other groups involved in incident response who aren't directly in your reporting chain, like legal, physical security, IT, system administrators, loss prevention, etc. So I have two boxes here. The box to the left is mostly your blue team. You've also got I don't want to get sued, so I can't call it the P word anymore, your violet team, your penetration testers or vulnerability assessors. But primarily your blue team on one side, and then on the other side I've got the extended IR team. I've got your legal, physical security, loss prevention, and IT. Again, the people outside of your reporting chain. So in terms of your blue team, you have a few different roles on here that show up in most every IR team. And you may see them in your SOC as well. So when you're looking at your existing resources, you'll want to see if any of these job roles exist already. But what I want to talk about is what these job roles do, in case you don't know, and also what happens if you don't have them, because that's going to be your next question, because it's going to be, well, we don't really have that much of a budget to get all these people, so who can I live without? So I'm going to tell you, in the case of each of these job roles, I'm going to tell you what happens if you don't have it. So, who do I have to have? Well, to do incident response, you have to have some incident responders or incident handlers. They don't necessarily have to be dedicated in the SWAT team concept. And we could even have multiple sets of incident responders and incident handlers to maintain multiple incident response teams. If we're dealing with a couple of our groups, when we were going through Renraku's situation, we're having so many incidents that they had to handle more than once, one at the same time. So they would really have to have 2 incident response teams working in tandem. Otherwise, they would have to triage and prioritize one incident over the other incident. So you could definitely have multiple incident response teams. You could bring in consultants and contractors if you can't maintain the incident response team yourself, although that has its own concerns and issues. And you can possibly combine some of these roles. You could have a forensic analyst who also knows malware analysis. But again, then you're working in serial. You have to wait till one task is done to do the next task instead of working in parallel, which, as we as computer people know, is always going to be faster. And again, I'm going to use my favorite line in this talk, which is, it depends. Meaning, it's going to depend on all of these things we've already discussed. How big is your team? How many people are involved in it? And what are we doing? What is our industry? What kind of work are we doing? So there's a lot of words in this slide. Again, I don't like putting lots of words on slides, but people are going to use this for a reference in the recording. So I wrote out a little bit more detail on these. So the first role I want to talk about is malware analyst. So what does a malware analyst do? A malware analyst is a person who figures out what pieces of malware do and how they do it and how to detect those pieces of malware. So this can be on a heuristic level, just running the malware in a sandbox and seeing what does it connect to. Can I detect that network traffic? Can I update my signatures? Can I see what processes it spawns to look for them in my IDS, or my host IDS rather? Or it could be a code level analysis, reversing, which is somebody who actually sits there with a, like IDA and looks at assembly, takes a piece of malware, unpacks it, and figures out from the very most fundamental code level what it does. So if there's hidden things in the code like comments or functions that aren't being executed in a sandbox, the code level reverser will be able to see that. So those are the 2 levels of malware analysis, and a lot of people in security know how to do the heuristic level malware analysis. They can run a piece of malware in a sandbox and see what it does. Not so many know how to do the code level, the reversing. That's a very specific skill set, and you're not going to see that in every organization. But if you don't have a malware analyst at all, you're going to have to rely on things like your antivirus vendor or bringing in an outside consultant to do your malware analysis. So if you have an incident with proprietary malware that's targeted at you, which in some of these industries are more likely than others, we had our oil and gas examples, that'd definitely be a target for SCADA systems or ICS systems. If you have a piece of malware that's specifically targeted at you or your systems, then if you manage to copy that off your system or get a copy of it somehow, what are you going to do with it? You have this piece of bad code. You don't know what it does. You don't know what happens when you execute it. You don't know how to detect it. You don't know what it could have stolen. You just have it. So at that point, what are your choices? Well, you can send it to your commercial antivirus vendor, and they'll go, oh my God, this is a thing, we're going to write a write-up on it, and then they'll send it out to everybody, so the bad guys will know you detected it. But you will get a signature, and maybe your antivirus will be able to clean it off of your computers. But you'll never know more detail about what it could have stolen. You won't know exactly what it did. I mean, maybe some of the vendors will release a write-up with some C2 channels to tell you how to detect the network traffic, but not all of them do. You have no guarantees of that. You could also send it to a premier support or a malware analysis company or an incident response company. That's going to get pricey. But if you're only dealing with a couple incidents a year and you hardly ever have a piece of malware you need analyzed, that might be cost effective for you as opposed to keeping a malware analyst on staff. The concern there, again, is keeping that confidential. If you're dealing with targeted malware as opposed to your everyday crimeware, the moment you send that out as a signature update, or you send that out to a security research company, the bad guys know that you've seen it because they can see those signatures too. You better believe that bad guys are running all of their malicious code through VirusTotal to see what happens, to see if it's detected once it's out there. So they know whether people have already looked at it. So there can be a cost-benefit analysis done in terms of malware analysis based on the number of samples you might have to analyze regularly. And if you're dealing with a very infected environment, if you're dealing with crimeware all day, it might be a good idea to have a malware analyst who can generate signatures for you all day. But if you're just dealing with run-of-the-mill stuff and your antivirus solution is doing a pretty good job of detecting it, you might choose to outsource that to a third party. Now, in terms of your forensic analysts, what are forensic analysts doing? Forensic analysts are not the same thing as e-discovery on your legal team. They're not pulling people's email. They're not looking through their documents. The point of a forensic analysis in incident response is figuring out who did what, when, and how they did it. So if we're talking about these breaches of, say, a retail company, it's, okay, I have these hard drives from these machines that were processing credit cards, and I have a memory image from them, and let's figure out who logged into them and how they did it. Did they install malware? Are there logs that I can recover that have been deleted? Are there files that were exfiltrated? Did they make an archive and then exfiltrate it off the network? Did they install some hacking tools? Do I see something that dumps passwords? Do I see Meterpreter running? What can I find out about the way this machine was compromised to tell me more about the incident and what happened? Again, this is talking about targeted incidents mostly, but it can also be involved in analyzing run-of-the-mill malware infections. For instance, if you're dealing with a piece of crimeware that has remote access functionality, what documents got pulled off this computer? What passwords got exfiltrated? Could my documents be at risk? Could my passwords be at risk? Could they have pulled domain credentials? Do I see that happening? So modern forensic analysts do not only disk analysis, but memory analysis. And they are the ones who are telling you what happened on a computer and when. Can we outsource that functionality? Yes. There's lots of incident response and digital forensics companies that are out there who will take a machine image from you and they will analyze it and they will write you a report. And it'll be a very good report. It'll be very well written if you go with one of those high-priced vendors. It's going to be expensive again, and you have an added concern because you are sending your hard drive or your memory image outside of your company with all of the sensitive contents that it has. That could be passwords, that could be password hashes, that could be confidential documents if you're talking about a computer that had something sensitive on it. There could be international concerns if you're sending it to a contractor who's outside of the country where the drive originated. So there's a lot of legal concerns with using an outside forensics vendor that'll have to be addressed in any agreement you sign with them, and that you'll have to be concerned with while you collect an image or a hard drive to send to them.
Excuse me? I wonder whether many private companies would be interested in finding out who did what had done, when it was done. only, I guess, those kind of things would matter when legal kind of suits or...
Oh yes, definitely. When you're talking about targeted attacks, which is a major concern in incident response, you're talking about somebody hacking you. All of a sudden, you realize maybe 18 months later that somebody's breached your network, and these companies have to then make the decision. What do we do? We don't know what happened. We know that we've been breached. We don't know what machines are compromised. We don't know what's been stolen. And then you have to start from the beginning. You maybe have one indicator. Maybe the FBI told you, oh, we think that you've been compromised by an advanced actor. We see traffic coming out of your network. And all you know is that I have this IP address and it's generating malicious traffic. So then what do? You go over to that machine and you look at its security logs and you say, I don't see anything. And you look at its antivirus logs and nothing's fired. And then what's your choice after that? Well, you're going to have somebody really look in depth at that machine. You're going to have to look at what network connections it's made. Has it done anything unusual? You're going to have to look at the drive and start trying to see if you can find malware in memory resident or hidden partitions holding malware on the drive. And then after you have an idea, maybe you're able to recover some malware to send to your malware analyst. But after that, you have to figure out whether those actors moved laterally inside your network. So did they jump from that machine to another machine? And when did they do that? How did they do that? Did they do a pass the hash and just use the password hash to get into the machine? Or did they use a tool to run an exploit against the unpatched machine on your network? So what was the flaw in your security that allowed the malicious actor to get into your network? And what was the flaw that allowed them to move elsewhere in your network? And then finally, say they reach a sensitive server on your network that contains proprietary data. Did they successfully copy documents off of it, and did they successfully get them out of your network? You can't answer any of those questions, and some of those questions are legal questions, like did they exfiltrate documents, but some of them aren't. Some of them are defense questions. Some of them are triage questions, like how do we block their traffic immediately, because we know they're on our network right now. What channels do we need to block? What IP addresses or what traffic patterns do we need to block to prevent them from getting into our network any further? What accounts are compromised that we need to shut off right now? And any other signature updates that we need to do to get detection for their malware or their tools, we need to get those out as soon as possible. So there's definitely incident response and security concerns with not being able to analyze a computer forensically during an incident. And that can go for non-targeted incidents too. If you're dealing with a piece of malware that's spreading rapidly across your network and you don't know how it's doing it, forensic analysis can tell you how it's spreading and how it's connecting outside of your network. Make sense? Cool. So that's what we can do with and without forensic analysis. In terms of log analysis, it's kind of the same thing. Now, we might have that functionality in our SOC, but I'm really talking more than just going through a SIM. I'm talking about deep packet inspection here. People actually able to look at packet capture data. Network forensics involves everything from looking at packets to see what happens to evaluating command and control traffic from malware. So figuring out how it sends data and what it's sending, because it's command and control traffic from malware and hack tools is usually encrypted and has to be decrypted for you to understand what it's sending, what commands it's sending, and what data it might be exfiltrating. So again, you can do this functionality with a consultant who gets your traffic after the fact. The problem with that is that most companies don't retain full packet capture data that long. Unless you're a large data storage company, it's ludicrous amounts of storage to maintain packet captures for an extended period of time. So you're not going to have that data necessarily for a long time, and it might be gone by the time that you actually analyze your incident and can send something out to a third-party company. And if you're dealing with like a third-party SOC, if you outsource your SOC to a security vendor, they don't normally have that skill set that's necessary to go through deep packet capture analysis and tell you what C2 channel your malware is connecting to and how it's doing it and decode it. So if you want to have that functionality, you're probably going to need to bring that in-house, or at least give your SOC the tools and the skills necessary to be able to do that. Security engineering. A lot of people have brought this up to me recently, that they're relying on security engineering teams that are split inside their IT organization between doing security and doing other projects. And that can be very damaging to security. We're talking about the people who not only maintain your security tools, like your SIMs and your log aggregation tools, but the people who are writing your IDS signatures and making your rules ticket and fire. That's usually a dedicated job role. And there's not a lot to say about this except for if you don't have somebody who's dedicated doing this, it's splitting off time from somebody else's job. It's taking time away from another IT team, or it's taking time away from one of your security people. So if you can have a dedicated security engineering person who manages your tools and manages your signatures and how they're deployed, do it. But if you can't, you're going to have to involve IT staff or contractors to maintain your tools and your infrastructure. And finally, vulnerability assessment. That's again your violet team. Your split between offense and defensive role. So that's your penetration testers, and those are the people who are looking for other stuff that's vulnerable on your network. And that's crucial to incident response because, especially if we're in an incident and we know that our attackers are attacking our network in a particular way, they're able to go out there and see if other things are vulnerable to the same exploits or similar exploits and give us an overview of the threat landscape inside our environment. We can definitely contract out pen testing and vulnerability assessment, but they won't have a intimate knowledge of our network environment. They won't know how we do things. They won't know how our passwords are structured. They won't necessarily know things that an attacker who's been embedded in our network for 18 months knows about our network. And finally, threat intelligence. I keep coming back to this and plugging all the threat intel talks that I've seen at this con so far. It became a buzzword a few years ago, and before that we really didn't talk about it, but now it's critical. It's not a buzzword. It does not center on the word I won't say that starts with an A. I still don't have a drink. All I've got is water. It does not center on that. Threat intelligence tells us what malware is out there. It tells us what's targeting our industry. It tells us what infections we could expect to see on our network in a given week. It tells us what signatures we should update. Threat intelligence is the things that are affecting our industry, our environment, our country. And it's critical to have good, usable feeds of malware indicators and of threat actor indicators. So your threat intelligence person, what they're doing is they're finding out things that impact you. They are looking for not just go out to, I'm not naming vendors today. There's lots of threat intelligence vendors out there who will take your money and give you a feed of indicators. And emerging threats started this. They give you a feed of signatures that you can push out with current things that are seen out in the world. It's not a matter of buying a feed of threat intelligence indicators. It's not a matter of buying, okay, these are APT actor signatures that are out there right now. That doesn't have as much value as having somebody sit there and say, this is what impacts us. This is what impacts our industry. This is what we could see in our environment. This is something that's new and relevant and pertains to us. And that kind of threat intelligence, that's industry and company-specific threat intelligence, can only be gathered by our own people, or perhaps us hiring somebody to do threat intelligence only for our company. You're not going to get that by just going out and buying a black box threat intelligence solution. You get that by saying what we just did in the last exercise. This is what could be impacting our industry. This is what could be impacting a company that's doing what we're doing. Sitting there and thinking about it, and then looking looking at partners, looking at resources, looking at information sharing working groups, and figuring out what impacts us. And obviously, SWAT teams are going to remain a problem. We are splitting people's jobs between their normal job and potentially being taken away for weeks at a time to do incident response. The only thing you can do the things you can do to counteract that are train, train, train. Drill everything, drill all of your incident response procedures, and for those specific roles, give them all the training and tools you can possibly give them, and make sure they're available during incidents. And finally, make sure everything is documented. Documentation is critical in your incident response team, but it becomes 100 more times critical when you're talking about teams who do this job 2 weeks out of the year. And contractors, as we just said, yes, they're available, but are they following your procedures? Are there legal issues with them doing these roles? And do you have the proper non-disclosure agreements in place for them to do them? So, let's see where we're at. Let's go ahead and take a break. If you guys want to take about a 10-minute break, I know people are tired and want to go to the bathroom, get a drink. Go ahead and do that, and we'll resume in about 10 minutes with the next exercise. And if you have any questions, I'll be up here, so you can come chat with me.
So we're not going to have another mic.
Okay.
I want to make sure I actually got up here and watch now.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
Standard thing where every officer has this one. And then all you know is many people to do, you know, that.
Thanks, I got my water here. I actually don't touch the stuff. I'm wired enough already. I don't even touch coffee. Haven't had caffeine in 3.5 years now.
How's that going for you?
It's all right. I'm cool. I was up to like 7 monsters a day, and I was like, I gotta stop.
Yeah.
I gotta stop, like 7 monsters a day, and I just I gotta quit cold turkey. No more caffeine. Yeah, it was horrible. It's like shaking and stuff. I worked third shift for a long time. device stuff. See how many people I scared away. Incident response is hard. Nobody told me it was going to be hard.
I didn't think it was that hard. People pulled out because my dog escaped.
What?
And then people call me. He's like, yeah, so we had your dog and she got away from us.
Oh my god.
Like 4 mile radius from my.
Oh my god, are you kidding me?
No.
Has this happened before?
No.
These do not sound like responsible people.
I actually got pulled out because everybody was panicking because they wanted to get somebody to hook up a microphone out here for you.
I'm sorry.
I thought I was in there like when there was asked for it, I'm like going like this, and then he goes out. I'm like, okay. I figured Adrian was up there.
Yeah, I'm not worried about it. I'm not worried about it. It's fine.
No, she hopped back fence next to the neighbor's yard, which is an abandoned house.
It's all good.
And then just walked around with a couple mile radius. It's like, that's great. It's like, yeah, she was at Telegraph in Van Born, and that's like 2.5 miles from where I left her. And then they caught her like 3 blocks from my house, finally, the last people to catch her. Who are these people and why are they leaving voicemails? Oh,
was it Thursday night? I had somebody go over to the house to let them out. Thursday, he didn't have the main door shut.
The forensic analyst, the malware analyst.
Yeah.
I think those are necessarily not hacking kind of person, but they are very academic, and then they have really deep knowledge in assembly language.
Well, the forensic analyst doesn't necessarily have a deep knowledge of assembly, but the malware analyst definitely does.
Right.
It's a specific job.
Like in the file systems.
Yeah.
And those zeros and ones.
Yeah, oh, definitely. You have to be able to recover files.
Yeah.
Go through memory. You have to understand how drive structures and window structure works.
So those are very high core, hard kind of topics. I wonder how many among in the hackers community, what kind of percentage of people are really capable of doing such kind of work?
Well, I do digital forensics, and that's my specialty in incident response. And I know a lot of people in the industry. I'm friends with a lot of people in the industry who do digital forensics. Malware analysts are much more rare. They're a rare animal, and they still get paid like a rare animal. But there's a lot of forensic analysts.
So how easy do you find if you have to find somebody who is capable of doing it?
It's not uncommon. I think there's actually more forensic analysts out there than there are pen testers.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I thought pen test is relatively easier.
Leaking battery or something.
I wouldn't say it's easy. There's a lot more blue team people than there are red team people really out there. There's a lot more incident response people.
She was at the shelter for 2 weeks.
Various of those blue team roles I specialize that I pointed out than there are pen testers out there.
How about people's mentality? For example, fresh out of college, How much?
Pen testing is the pen testing is the sexy thing. Everybody wants to be a pen tester.
Fun.
Yeah, everybody thinks it's fun, and people. It's a much more competitive job space because there's less jobs in pen testing, and I see a lot of people going from pen testing to blue team eventually, though.
Oh, okay.
There's more jobs, and
then
it's very cutthroat, the pen testing industry, compared to the blue team industry. You really have to fight for the internships. They don't pay as well, but it's fun. It's a cool job. That's the rock star job.
They can always somehow successful.
Yeah.
In forensics, you can spend days.
There's always work in digital forensics, but it's
really hard. You're just finding needles.
You have to find it fun, though. Like, different people in security gravitate towards different things. We all start out in the same place. We all start out in the SOC, doing log analysis, and then everybody just kind of goes off in their own area, what their brain is wired to do. And in my case, finding stuff in memory makes sense, much more sense than exploits.
Private company?
I do.
You are like dedicated.
We're a managed security provider, so we do contracting for other companies. Mm-hmm.
So, I guess if you're specialized in that may be fine but the company who want to build a dedicated team, I don't know how easy they can find for talented forensic analysts.
It's not really that hard. It's really a lot more common. It's just not famous. You don't get famous being a forensic analyst. It's not like being a pen testing rock star. There's lots of us, but we're just never going to be as famous or well known as the pen testers.
They may just forget about it. They may just try to hack their system and then just go forward rather than try to find out exactly what it is.
That's the problem. I mean, when things go wrong, they don't have a plan. So. Let's see how much time I got. I'm going to bust through this so that we can get done early. I want to get early.
They found her and they were nice enough to take. I like the exercise.
Yeah, we're about to bounce into the next one, which is Avengers Assemble.
She laid down.
Hopefully this one's fun too.
As soon as she saw a car, she got really excited.
This is exercise 3. I want exercise 2. Here's exercise 2. Yeah, this is exercise 2. So let me grab a copy of that one.
So they took her, so I called up and I was like, so Naomi jumped the fence and back. Regularly, yes, to the last. What do you think she was? I don't think she really jumped it. I think she scared her. So the backyard, the fence is going by all the way. If you want to ask, I said Jake Williams is supposed to be here. The ground isn't. He's down the hill.
He's here. I saw him last night.
He jumped off. Okay. He was already here.
Thanks for coming to my talk, by the way. I don't know what on the earth I'm going to teach you, but thanks very much for coming. I'm honored. I'm really honored. I learned so much from you guys everywhere. Everything I've got my basis in Differ, I got from Sans. I have nothing but awesome things to say. So I'm really, really honored that you guys would come to my talk.
How about pension? Which is a big push issue. Then
yes.
Things going on.
I'm going to get started, and people can filter in as they come in with their coffees and things, because I want to get us out of here early so people can go to dinner, and also so that we have a little bit more time to work on the exercises, because people were having more fun when it wasn't me talking. So we're gonna bust through a few slides, and then we're going to go into exercise 2 of 3, which is Avengers Assemble. And there's going to be a prize for exercise 2 because I want to give out these. I have some Avengers to assemble. I also have Guardians of the Galaxy, and I have Walking Dead. So the most interesting complete answer, I'm going to go for the most interesting complete answer to the next exercises, and that team will get some little bobbleheads because they're cool. And I'm a nerd. So we're going to pick up at structuring a team. Then we have a few more slides, and then we're going to go into exercise 2. And the next slide I've got here is structuring a team. So we've talked about the job roles that we need, and we've talked about the issues with using contractors. But what are some other concerns when we're pulling this team together? We're pulling all these jobs together. Well, first of all, within our own team, we need to have clear reporting structures. So we need to know who in our team reports to who during incident handling. So your incident handler, your incident responder really needs to be God for the purposes of the incident. When you start having too many people getting their hands into the pot, you start having big problems in incident handling. And that comes about when you don't have that incident handler as a filter for management. That's when you start having people throwing their political and their hierarchical weight around in incident response. You have your head of marketing coming over and saying, you can't shut off my web server. You have your head of legal coming over and saying, well, let's stop and rethink all of these procedures. For the terms of incident response, your incident responder and incident handler need to be the God for the duration of the incident. They need to be able to coordinate response, and they need to be able to do it independently in the middle of the night if need be. And they need to do that without resistance within the scope of their procedures and their mission. And that doesn't mean that they can go against corporate policy or that they can go against what their management chains say, but it means that they have a clear management chain. And if there's a problem with what they're doing, it needs to come through their management chain, through their CISO or their SOC manager, whoever they report to, as opposed to 8 people at once trying to manage the incident simultaneously from different directions. That's the purpose of having somebody in charge of the incident. They are the single point of contact. And you also need to plan for a varied skill level on your team. Unfortunately, not every forensic analyst is built alike. You need to be able to write your procedures and your plan to account for people who might not know as much as others. You might have one guy in your team who is the go-to guy for memory analysis, and then another guy really doesn't know how to do it very well. You can't have guy A who's really good at memory analysis going, I'll just do it all the time because I'm good at it, and analyst number 2 isn't so good at it, and I'm just going to cover for them. The moment you get hit by the proverbial bus, forensic analyst 2 has to do it. Oh, can you get that open? Forensic analyst 2 at that point has to do the job. So you've got to document your procedures and your appendices and your resources for forensic analyst 2 who doesn't know as much. So some other issues that you're going to run into are lack of trained staff. There is a hiring shortage if you haven't noticed in InfoSec. If you haven't noticed that and you're trying to get a job in InfoSec, Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Wonderful news for you. There is a hiring shortage in InfoSec. There is a lack of skilled people who know their jobs and have common sense and good business skills. And it can be challenging to fill those roles that you have open, some more than others. We were just discussing on the break that malware analysts are really hard to hire right now, especially good ones. They're getting pretty pricey. And then we also have a lack of soft skills in our industry. If you haven't noticed, not everybody can write an email. Sorry, it's true. So something we don't want to neglect in all of our fancy training that we send our people to during the course of studying incident response and specialized incident response skills is how do we present? How do we write an email? How do we talk to management? Can we do that courteously? Can we deal with people yelling at us? Those are the skills that are just as important as our ability to pull a malware sample or deal with a set of logs. We have to be able to have those skills in incident response because we're coordinating all of these teams together. And those skills can be drilled just like everything else in incident response. When we're drilling our set of technical skills, we can also drill our procedural and our soft skills. And finally, I already talked about overwhelming the guys who know the guys and ladies. The guys and ladies who are experts on specific skills. And that means that we have to do knowledge transfer. So if malware analyst A is really good at malware analysis and she's doing everything, malware analyst B is like, well, I can kind of slack off and just do some heuristic malware analysis because she's going to do everything anyway. You've got to make sure that you ensure that there's a knowledge transfer done there. And whoever's resisting it, whether it's the person who's overworked and doesn't have time to do the transfer, or it's the person who's being lazy and isn't as motivated to learn new things, that's the job of the manager of the incident response team, to go in there and say, we have a shortage of knowledge, we have a discrepancy, a disparity here, so we need to make sure that we get these people in a room and the knowledge transfer actually does happen, to the point of even disciplining someone if they're just refusing to learn new skills, refusing to enhance their skills, refusing to do knowledge transfer, unfortunately. But on a lighter note, we want to make sure that each member has access to all of the resources that everybody else does. That means software systems, log sources, analysis tools. We want to make sure that everybody has the same access to do the same jobs. And if you start seeing people slipping behind, and it's not because they're just being lazy and they don't want to do as much, provide them the catch-up training that they need. If they need to go to another training class to learn a skill, send them to a training class. If they need an extra set of tools or books to learn more, provide those. And we also want to teach as much cross-training between these job roles as we can, because specialization is for insects, and we want to make sure that our malware analyst understands what our forensic analyst is doing, and our incident responders know what everybody else on their team is doing. We're going to have problems with, of course, outsourcing and consulting, which are not just NDAs, but perhaps cross-country issues, legal issues, export of data. And we've got to do all of this amazing stuff, these great feats I've just talked about within our budget, within time and money. So that means we need our senior leadership and management buy-in, and we need to look at lower cost options in some cases. If we can't afford the ritziest log aggregation solution, maybe we look at something free, like Elasticsearch. If we can't send everybody to SANS guy is sitting over here, if we can't send everybody to SANS, maybe we need to set up an internal training program, or get them to volunteer at a SANS conference so they get to go cheaper. And maybe we want to look at using conferences as part of our training plan, because it doesn't cost that much to send somebody to CircleCityCon. You can do that for pretty cheap. Why don't we send them down the road and send them to CircleCityCon and hope that they don't drink the whole con? I didn't drink the whole con. I'm here. So good security people, the good ones who want to learn and are doing a good job and are trying to enhance their skills, they're hard to find. So make sure that you're educating them, you're giving them tools to succeed, you're motivating them to succeed. So if they deserve a raise, you're fighting with management to get them a raise as a manager. And that you properly compensate them, because, as I mentioned, information security jobs are in high demand, which means that smart, shrewd business people who are working in information security will be approached with offers from other companies and your competitors on a regular basis. So if you would like to keep them, you should probably be having your HR people do competitive job analysis and seeing how much people in other companies who are doing similar jobs are getting paid, so they don't steal all of your people. So, stuff. We talked about people, which I think is the most important thing, but I know you guys are going to ask what stuff you need to buy to build an incident response program. So, really briefly, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but You're going to need software, of course. And what specific software? I don't really want to get into detail on that. You're going to need the same sorts of tools that you use in a lot of security roles, like SIMs, log aggregation, virtualization, and sandboxing solutions, etc. You're also going to need a training budget for your people, because I hope to God you're doing some kind of training budget. And you're going to need hardware, of course, because you're working on computers, so you're going to need computers. You're going to need servers, etc. And beyond those initial costs, those capital purchases, you're also going to have emergency costs. If you have to fly your entire SOC over to Lithuania to do incident response, or if you have to replace a server that you just brought down in the middle of an incident because they're really mad at you that you brought down their critical business server and they need a new one right now, that'll be an emergency cost that might be on you. And you're going to have your operational, your lights-on costs. You're going to have your licensing fees. You're going to have your software maintenance fees, your support fees, etc. So the recurring payments throughout your cycle as a incident response team. But like I said, there's some basic things you're probably going to run into needing in incident response, and they're the same things you run into needing in a lot of security roles. You'll need your forensics tools, your forensic deployments for your forensic analysts, and perhaps malware reversing tools like IDA. You'll need a log analysis solution or log aggregation solution like your Elasticsearch or your Splunk, etc. You'll probably want to do some packet capture and analysis outside of Wireshark. You can use Moloch for that if you want to go the cheap route. Obviously, there's more expensive solutions out there too. They both have their merits, and you should weigh those prices versus what they offer. And beyond that, I suggest having a trouble-free ticketing solution, meaning Remedy isn't necessarily going to work for your incident response team, because I said I wasn't going to name products, you guys. You're letting me name products. I'm sorry. Okay, so why is that? Because first of all, it's shared with your entire IT team, and you might not want them reading the bad things that they did on the network, especially having ticket editing ability on the bad things that your employees did on the network, especially if your IT is contracted out. All of a sudden, you've got a wide base of IT contractors able to see who's hacking your network and what your employees have done wrong in terms of insider threats. So first of all, segregation of data. And second of all, those systems aren't made to store security incidents. They're not made to hold indicators or malware samples. In fact, some very bad things can happen in those systems if you start plugging in links into your ticketing and it auto loads them or auto-populates them, or auto-opens your malicious files that you attach to the ticket. So you want to be really careful using your commercial IT ticketing systems for incident response. And you want to make sure that your ticketing system will be accessible even in a bad scenario. An incident could occur that damages your network access or causes latency in terms of DDoSing, and an external ticketing system might not be the way to go if you're concerned about those types of incidents.
Do you have a recommendation of an inexpensive one? Fairly affordable, I should say.
I really don't want to recommend a vendor product for, my recommendation for that is if you have a developer on staff, build your own solution. If that's the most ideal scenario, is build your own solution for containing incidents. You can start with a lot of different platforms, free ticketing platforms, and build onto them. That would be my suggestion if you have the luxury of having that kind of developer space open. The other solution is there's a couple open source companies who are developing security-specific ticketing solutions. But again, I really don't want to get into picking one vendor over another. But I more want to warn you against just picking up QRadar or picking up Remedy and trying to plug security stuff into it. especially without heavy modifications, to make sure it doesn't do things like execute links or execute software or make it really easy to click on it by default. You'll want to have probably some sandboxing solutions. Again, we've got things like Cuckoo Sandbox that are free, but there's paid solutions that have benefits as well. Access to messaging solutions, as we mentioned, good threat intel sources, which sometimes cost money. A documentation management solution, which can be free like a wiki or paid like many other document platforms, which I'm not naming because I'm not naming vendors. I'm sure you can think of some. Proper storage of evidence. You're dealing with indicators of compromise, you're dealing with actor information, you're dealing with forensic images, and you don't want that stuff out there where everybody on your network can grab it. There are legal concerns, and there are just plain old security concerns with that. And finally, your dedicated training budget, which we already mentioned. If you don't have a documentation storage solution for your security operations center or your incident response team, you're doing it wrong. You should be documenting everything that you're doing, not just as part of your incident response solution, but also as your after action report and your lessons learned. And finally, as I keep mentioning here, avoid those shiny boxes. I don't know if I've made this clear by talking about all kinds of different shiny box traps you can fall into, but there's lots of security vendors out there now who will sell you SIMs and IDSs and incident response tools of all sorts, and they will tell you that that is your whole entire incident response solution in a box. And it isn't. I don't care whose solution it is. It is not your incident response solution in a box. All of these solutions that they want to sell you will require maintenance. They will require trained people to look at their outputs. They will require modification and tuning. So be really careful, because those companies have really great sales pitches to your upper management, and before you know it, you will be buying all kinds of interesting shiny boxes that you will not get much value out of. So the question you need to ask when you're approached by those vendors is, can I support and use those tools and services, and will it have a benefit to us, a real benefit to us? If it's not monitored and updated and maintained with your input, your personal case input, there's no benefit to them. So we're going to do exercise 2, and that's vendors assemble. I've got it ready to go up here. If you want to go ahead and grab it, let's try to get through this in under half an hour so that we can get out of here a little bit early. I want to move on to exercise 3. So let's get started. It is 5 o'clock. If we can be done by 5 o'clock, by 5:30, then we'll move on to exercise 3, get that done, and be out of here by 6. So I'm going to pull up for this one, because in exercise 2, Mr. Lanier is asking you to help him staff and purchase stuff for his SOC. And you're going to help him decide what he does with those people.
There's more material on this side. So if you're doing statistical because concealed diets are
Do a spare copy of exercise one.
Sure. There you go.
Thank you.
Of course.
So you don't have the 1 week of 6.
Numbers are different in sales and
I would say so we are lacking with our so we need to hire more right that would be because you've got 3 years, 5 years.